Hey, hi! Listen, don't make sudden noises, or these little guys will get scared. Welcome to our first Kobold story. Today we talk about Balrijin, a federation of clans centered around a council of sages nestled atop the mountainous capital of Balris, a rugged cradle of a rugged people. They are obsessed with one thing and one thing alone. Balris the Gold, golden dragon of the east, he who will return, bringer of songs, slayer of ignorance, wisest of masters. Centuries ago, maybe even a millennium, he first graced his kobolds with his presence, his scales as gold as theirs, but his physique unfathomably more gargantuan and awe-inspiring. This was no mere coincidence. Whether he created them or has merely adopted them due to their likeness was hotly debated among sages, but all agreed that the dragon elevated them from tribal feuds when he settled down in Balrijin cave and began giving counsel to them. Balris taught the gold scales how to live in unity, how to host feasts, make art, and write music and poetry. He also guided them spiritually by teaching them the higher truths of philosophy and magic. For 2 generations, the dragon sage tutored them and shaped their budding state. But as time went by, he grew restless, eager to continue his journey in search of his kin. When he left, he swore to the kobolds that he would return to them soon, but it has been 9 centuries since his departure. This was a long time even for a being as timeless as he. Though some among the sage council feared the worst, they decided they must seek him out, for no gold scale could truly rest while Balris's fate remained unknown. Until that would happen, they would fervently hold on to his teachings. All previous searches ended up being dead ends, but in 1444, new rumors have been spreading from across the western border. A golden beast was attacking humans in Jinkyu. The kobolds just had to investigate. In more immediate history, Balrijin was attacked by an expansionist and aggressive statocracy, Jiangdu. The kobolds, masters of attritional warfare, managed to defend themselves, but not alone. The peasants of Lianjin aided them by rebelling against their masters in what was called the Blue Scarf Rebellion. All of Jiangdu's holdings were lost to the peasants, who instated a republic in North Yanshen. This peasant republic was formally recognized only by the Balrijin Sage Council, and the two created a lasting friendship and alliance. There are many new things to talk about, but before anything else, the opening moves are quite important. Balrijin's ambitions are extremely urgent in 1444, and there is no time to waste. First, the kobolds expanded infrastructure in the capital Balris. Even if their holdings in 1444 were quite small, the development of their mountain home was impressive. 20 development is a lot, and it can be exploited very lucratively in case of emergency. Second, the first completed mission flag that hung on top of their map was a trap, and was ignored for a little while. What was of paramount importance was to use the money and military power to hire the cheapest mercenaries available and a general as soon as possible. The Blue Scarf Uprising was very successful but had yet to fully succeed. Jiangdu's generals had surely learned from their mistakes and would not be taken by surprise again. The Lianjin were timid, but with a push from Balrijin, they would eventually decide to attack the City of Generals before these had the chance to lick their wounds and summon allies in the region. The Kobold novice adventurers took full opportunity to help in the war, to earn the trust and favors of their peasant friends, but also a share of the loot. From all the clans, the kindled scales had been the most influential for the longest of time, and their techniques would rely on defensiveness. The Smoldering Claw clan, with their aggressive martial arts style, earned respect for resisting the subjugation of the Golden Kobolds during the time of Harimar the Great, but then faded into relative obscurity. They were newly awakened, however, during the wars with Jiangdu, and would prove to be an excellent balance to the relatively stagnant kindled scales. Balrijin's military would function as separate factions being paid for by taxes, but refusing to operate under one unified command. This state of affair would not help anyone in the long term, so the Golden Sage came out with a new old idea, the dragon dances. In ancient times, clan leaders, sages, or even brothers would solve disputes or establish hierarchy through the only way no one could challenge: martial arts. With a need for clear hierarchy, the dance was more than just honor. It was about influence and power. The duels would take place in front of Balrijin Palace, the cavern which once housed Balris the Gold, and the location of the first ever dragon dance. As the council came together to see the two sages duke it out, a crowd of hundreds of onlookers attempted to get a view of the fight. State officials had the first few seats around the fight for themselves, with the regular folk many rows behind them. The ones with the best view, however, were the dozen of kobold children, who have climbed atop the cave opening of Balrijin Palace and enjoyed a bird's eye view. In 1446, the Smoldering Claw earned their place in the lead of the army for the next 10 years until the next dragon dance would be organized. The major external priority was to reach out to other powers within Hales. Foreign diplomacy was not something that the kobolds ever pursued before the state of Jiangdu attacked a few decades earlier. In contrast to their monstrous kin from the rest of Halan, the gold scales were treated by the people of Yanshen with relative respect. Their golden scales were treasured as glittering good luck charms, and many dignitaries would seek to summit the mountains of Balrijin to acquire them, bearing extravagant gifts in return. Even so, only after the peasant rebellion became their friend, the kobolds realized that employing Jiangzun human diplomats made communication with foreign realms much easier. These diplomats became one of Balrijin's many factions, and they were named the Golden Tongue. Balrijin found a great opportunity in allying with the Wulin to the west. The martial arts master monks of the Jianglu Xiaqian would also gladly trade and share craftsmanship with the Golden Kobolds, not to mention invaluable military assistance. Alliance with the Republic of Kohai encouraged the migration boom. The clock was ticking for the Kobold Sage Council, and that clock sounded like drums of war. The Knowing Eye clan, which handled most information gathering within the realm, had come with reports of a large golden beast just across the border, in Jinkyu. This could have been Balris the Gold. Any rumor about the Lord Dragon was both too good to be true and too important to ignore. The Eternal Council of Vampires was deeply secretive and had to be opened by force. Balrijin announced to their allies that Cao Ying, the Balriza Hills, and the Jinkyu state itself were of great strategic importance and called the Xiaqian to war with promise of lands and prestige fighting the left-hand path heretics. It was really unclear why did the misty monks join for promise of land, but the kobolds would not deny the help of 110,000 skilled warriors. Lian Jinghui decided to help with the defense of the mountain citadel. The few kobolds would have been too frail to resist the troops of the Eternal Council alone. Smoldering Claw put together a cunning plan to ambush the Jinkyu in the hills of Xerivur, but the vampire thralls mopped the floor with the little lizards. Their allies had great success in pushing them back and slowly sieging down the black forts. The greatest peril to the search of Balris was that the isolated vampire lands would be instead taken by some other hungry and powerful neighbor. Jinkyu was surrounded on all sides by the dragon warlords of Bianfang, the sinister Oni of Azjakuma, the dreadful masked riders of Nugdan Tsarai, and the Yuno Confederation, either of them ready to pounce at a moment's notice. Balris was not found in either Jiashik, Tiaoqi, or Kaoying, so the search continued further west. Not having any access to the Jinkyu lands, the Xiaqian were happy to receive the tribute of loot and several golden scales, which they wholeheartedly deserved for helping. Yet the thousands of volunteers and soldiers searched the hills in vain. The golden monster was not a dragon, but a malicious golden spirit of some kind that had been plaguing the countryside. A nation was seemingly invaded for nothing, but the kobolds could at least rest with the thought that some humans were liberated from their vampire oppressors. The initial search for Balris sparked a wave of pessimism in the Balrijin lands. Hope was not fully lost though. No single kobold had ever set foot into the libraries of Jin Cheng, and the recent invasion was a great opportunity. Beikling human informants told the kobold spy master, the sage of the Knowing Eye clan, that a great collection of knowledge, including accounts of mythical beasts, could be found here. The Knowing Eye clan itself, a collection of minor clans with a vast network of spies, informants, assassins, thieves, and most notoriously, diviners, together with the help of the Beikling humans, set to work infiltrating the vampire's library. In their search, they found something. Reports from centuries ago that claimed a golden cloud moving northwest over the nearby hills. It had become clear that action against the ogres was necessary to follow this trail into Unbeksu. In the meantime, the Lianjinhui victory over Jiangdu opened up the previously forbidden city, in which the peasants settled in as their new capital, after asking counsel from Balrijin. Jiangdu is more exposed to their enemies to the east, but much more defensible than their former farmland mayorship. Free passage between Balriza and Jiangdu allowed a wave of cross-settlement by humans and kobolds alike. Most importantly though, the mutual trust between the two nations created a unique bond, where the peasant republic mayors would handle internal affairs, but leave the strategic initiative to expand the revolt to the Sage Council in Balriza. Through decision, the Golden Kobolds would embolden Lianjinhui to attack their neighbors to free the peasantry of Yanshen from greedy warlords and oligarchs. The Grasping Tail faction would also be empowered by these developments. They represented the traders and would later establish the new headquarters in the half-subterranean hill town of Xerivur, ideally placed on the mighty Yan River and with plenty of space to build, while in a comfortable distance to supply Balriza. The Grasping Tail clan would build a new market plaza in Xerivur where lowland merchants could offload their goods and then leave the difficult height to Balriza for the experts. The first target of the new Balrijin and Lianjinhui War Council would be the Republic of Gushuokuan. But terrible things were moving in the west, and the mighty boot of the Hobgoblin Command was raised to stomp the misty hills of the Xiaken. The Command's campaigns were inevitable, and so was their might. As disheartened as the tiny kobolds were, and as wide the unrest in the newly conquered lands, on the brink of giving up on the search for Balris, Golden Balrijin saw three advantages in the tragic situation. One was the quick repair of the Balrizar Zong, the mountain fortification previously sabotaged by Jaher's Sun Elf invaders. This fort would confuse and delay the command's scouts in the hills and allow the meek kobold army to hide. Second and most crucial, there was no land connection between the Jingqiu Hills and the command's territories, so there was no fear of annexation. The third advantage was that the command was brutal, but at least it wasn't as sadistic and monstrous as Eagle Crest. The mighty monks of the Xia would pay a heavy price, but the gold scales were ready to have the monks pay that price for the greater good. And hopefully the war would see armies, enemy or allied, punish the inevitable rebellions that were brewing in the newly conquered lands. Eventually, northern Xianzhe would be confiscated by the hobgoblins, and the entirety of Hales was trembling at the fear of the next target of the command's merciless campaigns. The kobolds had to move even faster in the search for Balris. The great golden dragon was the only hope for a free Yanshen, if not a free and happy Hales. And Balrijin pushed on. The Azjakuma ogres, mighty in their own right, were not fielding an army large enough to stop the scaled explorers. Yet the terrifying magics at their beck and call would punish the incursion with terrible attrition, almost as scary as the big riders of Eagle Crest. It was a contest of wills between the Lianjinhui and Smoldering Claw fighters sieging the ogre forts and the ogre mage armies that were raging against the fortifications of Balrisen. The search for Balris grew increasingly vast, a large assortment of people being drawn to it, including Bakeling human adventuring parties. But whether they were thorough as the military or just zealous in their quest for payment, it was up for debate. The sad reality was that every single mountaintop in the region was distinctly devoid of the colossal draconic icon. Perhaps building a mage tower in the capital and establishing the headquarters of the Knowing Eye clan would help divine the next steps. Until then, the war with the ogres had to be carried on to its conclusion. While the peasant armies break themselves against the Oni forts, we can take some time and talk about the unique features of the kobolds in general. The kobold administration is particularly bad at conquest. They suffer a +5 years of separatism penalty, which translates in a larger number of rebels, which are very tough to appease. This could be countered by employing vassals, but the kobolds have particularly disloyal vassals, with a flat 10% extra liberty desire, a 25% extra liberty desire from subject development, and -1 diplomatic reputation. Ouch. Their diplomatic technologies are also 5% more expensive to research, which compounds an already serious problem. Balrijin counters this a bit by the +2 diplomatic reputation from national ideas and through the fact that, at the moment at least, they are the only non-monstrous kobold tag which spares them from an additional diplomatic penalty. Economically, they suffer from 10% lower tax income and 25% more expensive inflation cost reduction. The latter is particularly painful for the gold scales, but we'll come back to that. The pretty big advantage that the kobolds get, though, is 10% cheaper development and 10% extra production efficiency, meaning that they can earn a lot of cash through developing their core lands. They also get a decent global settler increase bonus, but Balrijin is far enough away from any colonization opportunities to really make use of this. 10% military technology cost is a nice to have bonus, but their military is maybe the worst available in the early shock phase of the game. Kobold military advantages are twofold: large numbers and high attrition for enemies. Otherwise, their troops are made of paper. Being a foe on the same level as a lowly level 1 brat in most RPGs, kobolds have terrible combat stats, 5% lower morale, and 10% extra damage taken from all sources. Their cavalry is also useless. Galleys are also made from paper, but this time on water. They are made by kobold children for fun and are not to be used for war in any circumstance. Their strengths come in the mid to late game with 10% extra fire damage dealt and 10% extra artillery combat ability, but in the first 2 centuries, the kobolds must play defensively, rely on high attrition and well-placed forts to survive. 5% extra special units also comes into play quite late when artificer regiments become available. This is after the year 1650 in the case of the gold scales. The Canorian Koboljan can employ these much earlier, but that's a different story. Kobold population is particularly great. They grant 20% local construction cost reduction and 10% less construction time. In addition to that, they also make attrition for enemies even worse, adding 1 more point to their innate attrition advantage. The already fairly unique race is connected to many unique systems of Balrijin, first of which is their special Theocracy, the Sage Council. Their religious beliefs are fueled by their inexorable drive to find their Dragon Lord, and the council itself is a congregation of sages of the most powerful clans, factions and guilds in the realm. They gather in the Ri-Iha temple at the top of Balriza to discuss matters of state and faith, but in the end, the Golden Sage who is picked from among the council has the final word. He is to interpret and apply the teachings of Balris as close as possible. If they are unable to fulfill their duties for whatever reason, a protégé will take their place. The Golden Sages who rule the council offer a unique set of bonuses tied to the clan that they belong to, and with time and with progress through the mission tree, many more clans may send sages to become protégés, diversifying the bonuses available. Kindled Scale sages will grant defensive bonuses, for example, while Smoldering Claw will contribute with more siege ability. The Grasping Hand clan will bring an extra merchant and trade bonuses, and so on. As a baseline, the Sage Council Tier 1 reform comes with 1% extra missionary strength and 10% clergy loyalty, while making the clergy and the mages 5% more influent. The downsides are the penalties to tolerance of heathens and heretics, which makes conquered people even more rebellious. And finally, the -10 opinion of heretics is mostly irrelevant, because the left-hand path nations must be purged of their evil ways for the good of Yanshen. Aside from the love for their dragon teacher, Balrijin piously adhere to the righteous path faith, which makes them fairly skilled martial artists. The little reptiles' techniques are more of a dance than a fighting style, but the base bonuses of the religion do come with some extra tax income to counteract their natural malice, and with a small yearly army tradition bonus. The Righteous Path is a collection of folk teachings, and the Golden Scale Kobolds would teach their children about respect for the spirit world, about the Chi life force, about the balance it demanded of the people, and about the nightmarish eagle crest pig rider flares. Like their left-handed path heretics, the followers of the Righteous Path can activate aspects of faith, the mechanic of vanilla Protestants. Each aspect of faith grants a strong bonus, but is counteracted by a similarly strong malice to balance the Chi life force, so central to their beliefs. The aspects differ from region to region and from culture to culture, but Balrijin is cursed with a permanent aspect, the teachings of Balris. This aspect will always take one slot, even if one attempts to remove it, and it offers a minus 1.5% yearly prestige decay for the price of a 0.2 inflation increase every year. This inflation malus is particularly painful for kobolds and will be a major crutch in the campaign, costing a serious amount of administrative mana to keep in check. This is what the Yanshen kobolds get for being covered in literal gold. After the disappointment of the Unbeksu expedition, a mage tower was constructed on the peaks of the capital, with the Knowing Eye clan gathering around it as well. Diviners of the realm united for a grand ritual of mass divination that was never attempted before. Hundreds of diviners working together to try and locate Balris. They all gathered around the tower, while the Sage of the Knowing Eye funneled their energies into the sky from the top. They tried to summon the Great Dragon in their vision, but nobody really knew how exactly he looked like. The murals in Balkhangfa were two-dimensional, and the statues of him were from generations after he left. Trying to conjure an image of his location or a hint of cardinal direction, all they got was nothing but fatigue and fuzzy colors. For hours they chanted in unison, and one by one they began to fall from exhaustion until something spectacular occurred. All of them had the same image burnt into their retinas. A behemoth of a beast so golden it was nearly blinding, sitting atop a mountain so high mists surrounded it in its entirety. It was unmistakably a dragon. It was unmistakably Balris. He was out there, somewhere. Optimism came back to the kobolds, and they decided it was time to visit some mountaintops. None of this would have been possible without the established headquarters of the Knowing Eye clan, whose tower and academy complex in Balris received founding after their clever recovery of the clues from the libraries of Jincheng. Each of the factions would eventually get a headquarters of their own. The Kindled Scales and the Smoldering Claw were set up in the Bakeling Hills, formerly controlled by the Jinkyu vampires. The Kindled Scales were once the ceremonial life wards of the Dragon Sage. They focused towards the defense of Balris from external threats after the Great Worm's departure nearly 1,000 years ago. As they expanded their territory, these stalwart defenders have taken the responsibility of protecting all cities in the realm, and for that they proposed the building of a massive fortress at Yanshen, from which they can better intercept any incursions of Nugdan Sarai to their north. The offensive-minded Smoldering Claw have expressed their desire to be located closer to future war fronts in the south, and asked for permission to construct a fortress monastery in Emoglu. With a solid hold over the southern Unbeksu and the Oni influence in decline, the hills around Kabiurgarko experienced a massive economic boom. Bakeling humans and kobold miners swarmed into the city, each hoping to stake a claim of their own in the mineral-rich countryside. Teeming Arm constructed an expansive storage and administrative facility to centralize control and bring some semblance of order to the area's affairs. The Golden Tongue needed a place from where it could communicate easier with the human community in Yanshen, and the decidedly best location would be the city of Yangzhong. A Golden Tongue hub there would enable envoys to quickly travel up and down the Yan and yet be close enough to the Golden Sage to relay and exchange any relevant diplomatic communiques. Each headquarters can be set up via decision when these are unlocked through missions and if the conditions are met. Each takes away 5% of crown land, so aside from out-of-control inflation, Balrijin is also plagued with a constant and severe lack of crown land in the early game, which must be carefully managed. Conquest does return some, but estate influence is naturally quite high. One fun aspect that I missed until extremely late in the game is that even if the HQs start small and their bonuses are a bit lackluster for the costs, they can actually be upgraded through developing the provinces that house them. This makes them very lucrative indeed and is something to keep in the back of your mind. The 20 years after the 1454 invasion of the Command were spent carefully growing the Kobold lands themselves, but also cultivating the peasant friends in Lianjinghui, as well as the vassal state of Yuanxi, established to take care of the Oni lands in the hills. The Kobolds, with their ways, preferred to limit themselves to the lands populated with Beikling and Jiangsun humans, to take the time and teach them that they are friends and not merely conquerors. The ogres were not friends though, and had to be taken care of once and for all. Yet the path to the Jade Mountains was blocked by the command's ambitions, who threatened Jakuma with war and seized one hilly province at the foot of the Jade Mountains. For Balris to be found, this one province had to be taken, and the command had to be stopped from pushing further and further into Yanshen, if at all possible. In 1478, the command broke the alliance between Xiujut and Balrijin by force. This was a sign of doom, and the nation went into a frenzied panic. Golden Tongue emissaries began sprinting across all Yansheni roads, trumpeting the incoming invasion and begging for help. Between a broken Xia, the townships of Azkare and Thirambir, and the pitchfork-wielding Lianjinghui, the Balrijin forts would have to work overtime to break the tide of incoming hobgoblins and their monstrous slave armies. The command's generals have also not chosen the best time to invade. The Kobolds recently learned new martial arts techniques after long exchanges with the Vulin. While relatively few in number and relying only on their fighting styles and hope, the allied armies were as ready to fight as they could have ever been. The dragon dances taught the Kobolds well, and for the first time in centuries the rival clans worked together in the dance against the marching monsters. Fighting the command was a true living nightmare, and the allied armies barely gathered enough strength to survive. The Vulin lost some more lands, but the Kobolds managed to gather enough leverage to demand peace and the annexation of the last province in the Oni Hills. Finding Balris was now not only an ambition, it was an existential necessity on which the survival of anything good and just in Hales would hinge upon. Searching the entirety of the Ogre Hills yielded more of the same. Nothing. Pessimism shrouded the search once more, and the Kobolds became disheartened by the attrition suffered during the search. Getting more and more desperate, the Golden Sage decided to undertake a project of gargantuan size, sending a civil servant to every settlement that bordered the mountain that was not yet searched. The Knowing Eye clan sent agents from Paravhimvata, the range that separated the Lashrachen from the sandy Boulevard, to the Phokao range, underneath which the dwarves of Verkal Ozovar ruled over their protectorates, and even in the hostile hobgoblin lands around the Jade Mountains. The Golden Kobolds had ears everywhere. Along the Yan, Balrijin had to break open the gates of the Eunuch Hagbox fortresses. The Golden Tongue needed a trusted base of operations, and the scheming eunuchs were taking advantage of the command's exploits instead of cooperating for the good of the realm. Lianjinghui was also slowly spreading their peasant revolution in the east and were gaining more land along the Jellyfish coast. Their continental revolt was noble and legitimized itself by proving that they could beat back eunuchs, statocracies and monarchies alike. In 1489, eternally grateful for the mutual trust and assistance in their struggle, Lianjinghui united their foreign policy with Balrijin and accepted to become an autonomous vassal. This way they could more easily support the Kobolds against the command while receiving aid in the east whenever necessary, without having to waste time and resources on diplomatic alignments. On the other hand, the beaten Jianglu Si broke off diplomatic ties with the Kobolds, struggling with infighting and a lack of balance caused by repeated batterings from the Hobgoblin legions. A new ally was necessary, and that ally was to be the Raj. Not entirely united, the Raj was a powerhouse in Rahen and was just as concerned by the command's gains in the ruined kingdoms. Yanshen and Rahen would stand together against the coming onslaught. In 1509, after the formal truces ran out, the inevitable legions began gathering to push into Lianjinghui. But this time, Balrijin would take the initiative, and together with the Raj and a few straggling Xia states, decided to strike first. This time, mercenaries were replaced with drilled standing troops, the first real Kobold army in Yanshen. The Ogre Hills proved themselves again to be an unbreakable wall, and the smoldering claws sieged down the command cities on the Yan, while the Raj pushed from the west. The Xia monks were also a good distraction in the south, yet the key to victory were multiple tactical defeats of the hobgoblins on the sun-baked plains of Shamakad and below the walls of Tugayasa. After 3 years of fighting, all that the Kobolds could boast was the recapture of a few townships, including the fortress of Bianfang. The Sage Council realized that this was not sustainable. The search for Balris had to continue, or else Hales was doomed to a perpetual war with an ever-increasing hostile force in its center. After all other disappointing searches, the well of ideas has run dry. The path forward was unclear. Until the thought of sending small parties to climb up mountains and just do a sweep search in an organized military manner. Therefore, the Golden Sage requested army access to allies around the mountain range and sent the best dragon dancers to climb. After a year, the expedition resulted in 3,000 lives lost and nothing good, not even with dwarven scouts, climbing gear and mages capable of bending rock. The best thing that the troops managed to find was Guntir Goldsmith, a dwarf who could do magic tricks with coins. A waste of resources. At first glance, the hidden reward was truly contact with the dwarves who made the Hokao range their home. Tales of impressive architecture, beards, beer, and knowledge about mountain living were shaping a way to employ new help. Guntir helped the sages establish formal relations with Verkal Ozovar, and eventually a caravan of dwarven delegates arrived in Balriza to see the sights and strike new deals. The Ozovari were much more adept in building impressive monuments, but they liked the Balkhangfa palace and complimented the Kobolds for its expansive size and serene energies. Some of the new friends also decided to settle in the Kobold capital and establish more permanent trade routes between the two races of short folks. If there was one last chance, then it would be that the Golden Worm would be somewhere in the Jade Mountains. One last search, as it was promoted in Balrijin. And this was to be the hardest yet. This time, goblin guides who have spotted the Zlatuzazen and Ozovari dwarves joined, capable mountaineers and miners all. The plan was simple: to start from the northern edge of the Ogre Hills and search every peak along the way to the peak that Zlatuzazen is said to patrol, right above Gronstunad. It was easier said than done. This would take an unbelievably high involvement from the state itself, stunting tax income and spiraling inflation out of control, while severely reducing army manpower, government capacity, and administrative efficiency for a massive last push. The expedition did chug along all right, with the top above the Malachite Respite being the first sight. The foothills of the Jade Mountains were left behind, and the terrain became a bare, craggy land, sharply ridged and steeply gorged. There was nothing yet to be found but tired backs, common cold, and sprained ankles. But nobody expected to find anything yet. A flag was planted on the first peak, and the expedition kept marching. The next goal was the peak known as Balris's Rest, the highest one of the mountain. The front of the expedition kept getting harder and harder to resupply as it worked its way through. Logistics were strained, and rations, equipment, and reinforcements took a full week to reach it. Yet they managed. 70 miles turned into 150, and the giant pile of bones, skulls, and refuse clogging a steep valley could be seen and unfortunately smelled from a distance. Something big had been dumping the remainders of its dinners here, both from before and after digestion. The smell was unbearable, and the sight was both impressive and repulsive. The diggers had no option but to build a bridge using the large carcasses scattered across as pillars and foundation. The expedition was on the home stretch, but no one expected to be so humbling. At least the end was in sight. The final part was by far the most dangerous. Forging a path up Balris's Rest was a battle against ever-increasing steepness, but also unceasing cold and wind. Not a day went by without a fatality, and some days entire teams were wiped out when a foundation collapsed or an avalanche pushed them back. However, one day, more than 3 years since the expedition was launched, the first roar was heard. Whatever was up there, it sounded big enough to be Balris. 2 weeks later, he blessed the expedition with his visage. He flew over and gazed upon his golden admirers. He was gargantuan, and unquestionably Balris the Gold. Like a long line of dominoes, the gold scales fell to their knees, saying prayers, gawking at he who will return. Balris seemed to look on with interest, following the expedition trail all the way to the foot of the mountains, and eventually turning around to do a double take before ascending back upon Balris's Rest, his millennium throne. Steep terrain, more and more steep and hostile, was now accompanied by a hardness of breathing and the omnipresence of snow and ice. Mages became increasingly vital in the final push, siphoning air and melting ice with fire magic. The elemental violence would sometimes create avalanches that would cascade their way down into the nothingness below the mists. Yet the climbers kept going. As the diggers' foreman declared their work almost complete, hundreds of dignitaries were already bunched up behind him, eagerly inching forwards. With a final strike, the tunnel's exit was sent crumbling to the ground, revealing the ancient steep-sloped caldera-turned lair within which Balris lay, gently snoring. The clergy were the first to storm in, starting a chant and quickly drowned out the dragon's snoring, entreating him to make his triumphant return to Balriza. Next came the nobility of the various warrior clans, showering Balris's rest in a carpet of gifts as champions of the Kindled Scale and Smoldering Claw paired off to perform silent dragon dances which demonstrated the progression of their martial arts since his departure 1,000 years ago. He rose slowly, opening sleepy eyes to gaze with no small amount of surprise upon his ardent admirers and worshippers. One by one, representatives of the various clans, factions, and the Golden Sage filed into the depression, hoping to speak with Balris, bearing yet more gifts, small statuettes of jade, bags of coins, ornately carved scroll cases containing calligraphed poems and declarations of his divinity. But Balris remained ever quiet. Hours went by, and the piles of gifts grew ever larger, some almost beginning to match their enormous recipient in height. And yet still, the great dragon sage remained in resigned, somewhat confused silence. It wasn't until the Musicians' Guild finally had their turn to present an offering that his demeanor changed. The crowd hushed as they sent forward a single boy carrying a traditional lute. As the young virtuoso began to pluck the first notes of the Song of Q, supposedly the tune played by the legendary bard and first kobold to befriend Balris at the mouth of the Balkhangfa cave over a millennium ago. As the young lutist played and sang, his expression shifted from resignation to sadness. When the boy at last put down his lute and bowed, a single tear welled and wended its way through the channels of the great worm's facial scales. After a pause, Balris opened his mouth and began to speak. "It truly has been an age and a half since I heard that particular song," he sighed. "When I left your people to discover the fates of my brethren, I had only intended to be gone for a short while. For a century or more, I soared on the winds of every sky on tired wings, walked the streets of every city in mortal guise, searching in desperation for any clue I could. But in the end, I found that most of my kin were slain, and the trails of the rest went cold. So I gave up hope. In my despair, I retired here, resigned to the probability that I am the last of my kind. To little avail, I tried to forget Jintas's wit, Aket's passion, Alos's courage." There was a catch in the dragon sage's throat, and another tear ran down his great golden face. Then he drew in a great breath, rising to his feet, fresh snow from the previous night's storm cascading from his colossal back and wings. "All I managed to forget was the warmth and joy of my time among the gold scales. Your performance, little one," he said, smiling down at the young musician, "has reminded me. Thank you. Truly, Q's spirit is alive in your heart. What is your name?" Batavix, my lord," the boy stammered, shaking in the snow, but still managing to meet the worm's gaze. "Well, Batavix, one cannot wallow forever, even one as long-lived as I," Balris declared. "I think it high past time for my vigil here to end." I suppose I shall come visit." The crowd roared as Batavix was lifted up and paraded around the caldera. The cheering began working its way down Balris's wrist, infecting the kobolds below, and it was not long before the entire 170 miles of caravan knew. Balris continued, "Now, if you all don't mind, it's terribly early and I'd like to sleep some more." With that said, most of the gold scales began to arduously journey back to Balriza, pondering on how not to disappoint Balris when he arrives. They had to make haste for his return. The serene stagnation of the palace of Balkangfa was broken suddenly, and all the kobolds who could put hand to hand and began milling around to prepare it for the dragon's return. New roads were paved, lifts built, and bridges strengthened. From the expedition's report, it was clear that Balris was caught in a mire of loneliness and grief. To pull him from it and persuade him to stay, the kobolds had to ensure that he would want for nothing, physically, emotionally, or philosophically. To the best of their abilities, they had shaped their realm in the image of his words, forged friendships and alliances all across the continent, and received tribute of both gold and sustenance into the halls of Balkangfa. The mages conjured the most magnificent feast to celebrate the event, and they hoped it would be sufficient. They have tried to find him for centuries, Balris the Gold, bringer of songs, slayer of ignorance, wisest of masters, he who will return. Now, not only they have found him, but convinced him to come back once more. They could finally have true guidance again. As Balris flew over the realm, taking in his new domain, fireworks and mesmerizing magical projectiles filled the air. A feast of epic proportions was raging underneath his visage. Days later, he was firmly nested into Balkangfa Palace and had begun his role to guide the nation. Though Balris did not wish to become the formal lord of the realm, his mere presence and the advice he offered from his abode in Balkangfa would surely usher in a new era. His first point of order appeared to be curtailing the power of the clergy who, according to him, have allowed the meaning of his teachings to become distorted for their benefit over his 1,000-year absence. May he never leave again. With his return, the path to enlightenment was once again wide open, and his reforms began to reshape the state and end the era of sages whose millennial work to find their patron was over. His wish, after reading up on various forms of government, was for the gold scales to write a constitution and enact a parliamentary republic, where all people would be represented, for a fair and just existence. All reform progress until then was lost, but the Golden Republic would serve the inhabitants of the realm and not the other way around, and that was good. Balkangfa remained the center of the new republic, and all the documents related to administration were stored in its ever-expanding tunnels and rooms. Nothing was to be lost, and all was kept in constantly expanding archives. The infrequently used documents being stored in the so-called deep state tunnels beneath the palace, in caves which the ancestral gold scales used to call their home. The conflict with the command, soon to be reignited, was seriously escalated by the avalanches caused by the last expedition. Hobgoblin foothill settlements have been severely damaged and their owners would return seeking vengeance. Balris had one thing to say about the command. The humans of Shamakad were far nicer downstairs neighbors than the Hobgoblins. They had far better architecture. I wouldn't mind seeing a return of the ruined kingdoms. There was no clearer sign that the old order had to be restored, together with the prosperity and trade potential of this region of Rahen. The greatest war in Balrijin history was declared against the command. The war to end all wars in Shamakad. There was no purpose other than the complete dismantling of the enslaving statocracy. Humans, harpies, kobolds, and even ogres signed up to fight, and with Balris's figurehead in their mind, they fought like never before. The dwarves of Verkal Ozovar and their subjects filled the backlines and defended the flanks. The allies smashed into the disciplined hobgoblin lines time and again and besieged their fortifications in the field and inside of the mountain. There would be no acceptable outcome but complete and total victory. A final end to tyranny and slavery in Hales. Elections took place even in wartime, with everyone contributing with votes, even the frontline troops. Presidents would naturally be selected from one of the major clans, but this time Balris mentioned that he wished to see the people of Lianjinhui properly represented as well. Thus, Lianjinhui nationals were also given the right to vote during elections and have their lands allotted parliamentary seats for a fair democratic process. Many nations were freed in 1548, but the biggest marvel was the liberation of Gatasak, Sir and Kadisrapur, ruined kingdoms that have been erased from the face of Hales more than a century before. Reestablished after a tremendous effort, the three states could not be expected to survive and thrive on their own. So delegation of the Golden Tongue were sent to each of their capitals to nurture a state of dependency from them. They all agreed to become autonomous vassals under Balrijin and work together to rebuild their war-torn lands. Kobolds flocked and settled en masse in Shamakad to help where they could and brought with them their poetry, dancing, and good luck charms. There was still work to be done in Hales, but everything from now on would be a breeze. Not even the Shuvushi terror riders could scare the Kobolds of the Golden Republic anymore, and the path to a free and happy Yanshen was open. Internally, the scale barons of the Grasping Tail faction toiled away at plans for a nationalized banking institution, aiming at regulating the inflation that affected the Republic's economy. They put together what was named the Scale Bank Initiative, which facilitated the creation of a national bank with its headquarters in the financial district of Xerivur. They would start small, but in time would expand even to the ruined kingdoms and Lianjinhui, and eventually grow to be the undisputed financial regulator of the continent. Trade with the Golden Republic also increased year over year, and traders could move freely and safely from Tianlou to Sarisung. In 1579, representatives from Lianjinhui requested complete integration into the Balrijin state. With so many institutions interwoven, it only made sense. The suggested name was Xerlanza, a combination of the gold scale word for gold and earth with the Jiangyang word for blue. Opponents of full integration complained that it would put too much strain on the administrative capacity of the realm, while proponents said it would lead to an ultimately stronger one. Balris favored full integration, but would grant his blessing if the Republic decided on a mere personal union with a peasant republic. The votes were in, and it was decided for true union, and the nation was renamed to Xerlanza. A place where all walks of life could be happy together, in harmony with the land, the spirits, and themselves. The humans in return dubbed the gold-scale kobolds as the fathers of Yanshen. They have truly shown the world that kobolds were a capable people, if not the most capable. The unification of Yanshen was unlike any other before, for they did not come as a foreign empire with massive legions, but a cave with mere hopes and dreams. What truly set them apart, however, was that they ruled with a golden claw, not with an iron fist. This empire would not crumble. Balrijin, nay, Xerlanza would not fall. What a beautiful story. What a wholesome little tag. I loved every moment of it, even the scary ones. Balrijin was a tag that I wanted to try for a long time, and it was rightfully requested before. I wanted to take my time and see what they're about, and I was so happy I did so. So many places in Anbennar are haunted by nasty, evil, or misguided things. It is a true pleasure to try something as wholesome as the gold scale experience. It's a tall kind of play that does not involve sitting around and developing provinces, which I believe is very difficult to create. Between rampant inflation, crownland struggles, and merely by being a tiny state with the weakest racial army next to the grandest military in the world, the challenges were many and intricate, but the story beats and rewards were a perfect counterbalance. The clan headquarter mechanics of Balrijin is a very neat idea. I like how developing lands plays into improvement of the headquarter bonuses. I just wish I knew that earlier. There is a small tooltip if you hover over the province bonuses, but they are very easy to miss. I just noticed them when I developed provinces for institutions and I saw the headquarters grow. Expanding through pushing Lian Jinghui towards conquering was also very interesting. It's a situation where control is given to the AI, which is always a risky affair, but to me it seemed like it worked quite well. I had a hunch you could eventually get the chance to make them a subject, so it really felt interesting to conquer and expand through a proxy. I personally felt the urgency of finding Balris after 2 terrible command wars. Whatever the dragon would bring, I was certain it was the key to win against them once and for all, and by gods it did. The dismantling of the command was also one of the more satisfying war outcomes yet. Removing the massive threat from the beginning of the game and taking the lands over diplomatically at the end was extremely satisfying. The final reward buff is also pretty cool. Seems like anyone born in Hales is born to serve the government capacity needs of their people. The permanent bonuses are the typical Halesi government capacity modifiers, but there is a hidden permanent effect that comes with it. Whenever a Kobold army spends time in a province, there is a chance that Kobold minorities will spread there. Kobold population is very powerful, with its construction cost and time reduction, and it's another way to empower your lands without having to culture convert. It gives the rest of the game a unique twist. The mission tree overall can be completed quite quickly, and from there on Balrijin is free to do whatever they want. World Conquest seems a bit unintuitive. I can see Balrijin instead as a nice cooperative ally for anyone not directly playing in Yanshen, though their game can end very abruptly if they are unlucky or if they take too long to progress in the early game. I didn't even get to talk about their ideas or unique monument, but I think I spent enough time on talking about what makes them unique. Their ideas work pretty well with what they do best. Construction cost and development stand out the most as major economic bonuses. They do get a bit of everything from strong diplomatic bonuses and decent military ones to some technology cost reduction on top. Very good ideas for the tall diplomatic play that they are expected to have. Thank you very much for listening, and a very special thanks to the Patreons and YouTube members. In no particular order, thank you Deppert, Maybe Pigeon, Shredded Paper Plate, Darth Mozart, Generalissimo, Baconomics, Peter Mushinsky, Casimir Overell, Alex, Old Toby, Thorsmain, Luke Forex, and Bellerophon. May the gold scales bring you good luck.